Hi everyone, my name is James Wade, and today I'd like to show you how you can use the HTTR2 package to query the OpenAI API. We can query models like GPT-3.5 and GPT-4, similar to the ChatGPT that I'm sure many of you have already played with. This will be the first in a series of videos that'll teach you how you can make your own chatbot using R. Let's get started. All right, I have open here the API documentation from OpenAI. This will be quite helpful when we're creating our own API calls using the HTTR package. And we're gonna focus specifically on the chat capabilities. Although it is in beta, given that we're talking hundreds of millions of users at this point, I'm betting it's going to be reasonably stable for us to develop against. As a tip here, if you're wanting to get started more quickly, I've found it quite effective to actually copy the curl commands and then asking ChatGPT to create API calls in R for me. That conversion is fairly reliable. I'm going to show you how we can actually build this without using ChatGPT for now, so you can learn along with me. I might make a few mistakes along the way, but hopefully you can learn from those mistakes as I make them. All right, so I've copied some of the useful documentation over from the OpenAI Playground into the Quarto document here. I want to talk through that a little bit before we get into actually building the API query to show you a couple of things that we need to make sure we include in ours if we want it to work. Looking at the curl command, of course, we need to set what's called the endpoint. That's the URL that we have here. I'll talk through a bit more of that in a moment. We need to tell it the content type to expect. The API expects a JSON payload. This is a bit of an unusual data type to work with. At least it was for me when I first got started using this, but it's very common when you're querying APIs. It's sort of the data type of the web, it seems. We also need to authenticate ourselves in order to use this API, and that requires you to have an API key. I'll show you in a few moments how I recommend setting that for your own development work. And then we also need to specify the model that we're going to be using. The default here, GPT 3.5 Turbo, that's a perfectly fine one for us to use. That's the model that is used behind the scenes for ChatGPT. And then also we need to provide a message to send to the service as well. This is a little bit more complicated than you might expect if you're new to interacting with the OpenAI models. Specifically, the chat model require us to provide not only a string of text that you would use to query the model, but also indicate the role. There's a couple of different roles available. Those are system, assistant, user, and there's a relatively new one called function. Today, we're going to mostly just focus on the user information. We can speak more about some of the others later on. And I've just pulled out this JSON object separately. This is what we'll be creating to pass to our model as well. Okay, so I mentioned that we're going to be using the HTTR2 package. I did want to mention that I've already installed a number of other packages on this RStudio Cloud instance as well. So if you want to mimic my computational environment here, go ahead and create your own account on RStudio Cloud. I'm using 4.3.1, and I've installed, in addition to HTTR2, Tidyverse, UseThis, DevTools, and Gert. We're certainly not going to use all of those today, but we might touch on some of these in future tutorials. All right, so the HTTR2, we need to create a request that we'll get to send to the API, and then we'll get a response back from it. Let's go ahead and get started with that. The first thing we want to specify is the base URL that we'll be querying. So you can also think of that as the endpoint. And I'm just I could, of course, copy this from above, but I'm just writing it out here for us. And we can create this request object. I need to load HTTR2. And we can just start out simply by just creating a request and passing the base URL. Okay, so what does that look like? Looking over in the console here, we've created a HTTR2 request object, and we can see that it has the URL here. Well, we need to specify more than just this /v1. If we go back to the curl command, we need to specify chat/completions in order to hit the completions endpoint. The way that we can do that is to, again, the HTTR2 package is going to be our friend here. If you're not familiar with this one, or HTTR, also called header, there's a number of convenience functions that allow us to put together these requests quite easily. And HTTR2 is specifically designed to be very pipeable, very friendly to the tidyverse design principles. So if you're already writing tidyverse code, I think you'll enjoy using the HTTR2 package. Okay, so we can keep going with this by piping this request object to creating more details on our path. So we can use this function rec URL path append, and we're going to just do the chat/completions. All right, let's look at what we've done so far. Looking at the console output again, we see that the request that we've made, the GET request, we haven't actually sent anything yet. This is just showing you what the request object looks like. We've now added chat completions to that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to provide some authentication. I was mentioning this before. We can do that by adding headers to our request. We'll have two components here. So the first one that we're going to do is the API key. And I'm just copying the same format that it expects up here. So oh, I think I might actually be wrong about that. We'll do this. So we're going to just use a built-in function called auth bearer token, or excuse me, rec auth bearer token. I was remembering a different API key that I was writing some code against, so that this will be a better approach for us. So we'll specify the bearer token, and we'll just have our token equals the a variable called API key. We'll come back to that in a few moments. We haven't specified the API key yet, so that's a variable we haven't actually created. I'm just going to come up here and say API key is nothing. And then the other thing we're going to do is specify the content type application/JSON, and that's copying up here. See this -h of the curl command, that's a header. So we're including the content type application/JSON. Okay, let's take a look at what we have so far. The authorization is redacted for us, so that's convenient that you don't accidentally expose your API key. And then we also have for the content type application, like application/JSON, as we expected. Another nice thing to do when you're making these requests is to tell the API owners who you are. We can do this. I could say, I can just put my name in here. This is my handle across a couple of different social media services. And I could say something like OpenAI tutorial. So if I were to be doing something that the API owners didn't want me to do, this actually lets them know who I am, so they could come and maybe contact me to say, hey, maybe I should stop doing that. All right, so the next thing that we're going to want to do here is provide the body to the HTTR2 request. This is important because this is where we actually send our messages. This is really the whole point. Everything above this is specifying where we're going to send things, authenticating, telling the API what type of data we're going to be sharing. The body is really the part that we that's kind of the whole point of sending these API requests, I guess. And I'm in here. I'm just going to use the function rec body JSON, And this is where we can put some dummy variables in here. The structure that we're going to be copying from up above, this JSON structure, you can represent this well by having some nested lists. And what I'll do for this is I'll say list model, spelling would be helpful here, GPT-3.5 turbo. Again, just copying what was up above. And we'll say messages equals list, role equals user, content equals hello chatbot. All right. So if we create that object, now let's take a look at everything we've done so far. It has, it's not actually including the individual output here, but we can actually see that we now have, there is some JSON objects that are encoded in here. So the next step that we want to do here, there's a couple of different features that I want to add before we're done, but we actually can go ahead and look at use a function called rec dry run that'll show us what this request will look like. Okay, so the difference between just printing this object before and actually doing the dry run is we can see how it's going to be provided. So again, it does redact the authentication token, but now here we have the JSON object that's specified. It would be a good idea to make sure that this is actually mimicking the structure up here. And this is a good check because I do see an error. So I think I need one additional layer of list here. And let's try this one more time. Yes, okay, that is the structure that I would have been expecting. Okay, let's actually take a break from the code, jump back over to the API, or the playground, the OpenAI API playground. I want to show you where you can actually get your API keys. So I have a number of these. I've been playing with this a good bit. Once you create your OpenAI account, you can just click this button to create a secret key. I'm not actually going to create one because I don't want to have to blur this out if I end up showing it a bit later. Well, actually, no, I can. Okay, let's actually jump back over to the API Playground documentation. I want to show you how to generate an API key so we can go ahead and make this call. All right, so if we go here, after you've created your OpenAI account, you can jump over here, click Manage Account, API Keys. Let's say create secret key, and I'll say R tutorial, create secret key. Here is my key. I can go ahead and copy it. By the time this gets posted, this key will be deleted, so don't bother trying to maybe write this down and get some free query. All right. So we're back over here, and what we're going to use now is actually to set the an environmental variable using a .r environ file. Okay, so we're going to use, I mentioned that I'd already installed use this, and we'll say edit r environ. Okay, and what we can do for this is OpenAI API key. We'll set an environmental variable to our API key. Again, you don't really want to share this with others. I will delete this key before this video gets posted, so that's why I'm okay with sharing it for now. I'll go ahead and save that. We can restart our session here. that will load our environmental variables. And I will say sys.getinv OpenAI API key. Okay, and there's one other change that I'll need to make here. Instead of actually two changes. I want to use rec perform instead of, I guess I need to load the HTTR library again, instead of the dry run, because we actually want to do this for real. And I'm going to assign this object to RESP for response. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. And with any luck, we'll actually get a response from the API. Okay, so no errors. That at least is good. And we can process the response by using, you'll be surprised to hear, I'm sure, another convenience function to process the JSON. And lots of things can come out of this. You can actually set an option in here that is to simplify the vector. We'll set that to true. And now we have a data frame that's coming out from this. And let's go ahead and assign that to OpenAI chat response. Just creating a variable here. And OpenAI chat response choices, message, content. Okay. I certainly would not expect you to have known this. I've worked with this API a good bit. Nested within all of this, there's lots of good information. In fact, let's print this to the console so you can see some of the additional components in here. We have an ID. It has the object name, a date, the model that we used. Note that this is different from the model that we specified. So when you specify GPT 3.5 Turbo, it defaults to the latest model. So that's what it actually used, kind of under the hood. And there's what I was indexing through here, looking at choices, message, content. If you just follow along with this, you can see that we're getting our response from the assistant. And there we go. That was the response to hello chatbot. It said, hi, how can I assist you today? All right, so we've successfully queried the API. Something I recommend doing at this point is let's put this into a function. And I'll just call this chat. Quite a simple function name. And for now, although there's lots of other variables that we could include in this, I'm just going to say message. Okay. And it looks like my formatting hotkeys aren't quite working as well as I would like them to. But what I want to do here is process our message body to be something similar to the structure that we had before. Role equals user, content equals message. I'll give that a name, user message, and we will replace that down here. There's certainly some limitations with this approach. It's not going to work very well if you wanted to provide history, but this will do a good job of letting you just query the API, solely providing a text, a string to this function. Okay, let me jump to the source mode so that I can actually just format this. Jump back here since this is a little friendlier. Okay, so we have certainly the starts of a function. I do want to add a couple of things to the API call. So something that can happen is your initial API call can fail. So let's add in some features to help deal with that. The first thing we'll do is allow for up to 4 retries to query this API. So basically, if it doesn't work, it'll try again. And we can do, a danger of trying this over and over again is you can end up exceeding the limit that you're allowed to query this API. This prevents the API from basically going down with too much traffic from a single user. I'm sure there's a more sophisticated way to describe that. One way to deal with that is to have this rec throttle. So if it fails, it'll wait for some time before it tries again, and then if it fails yet again, there'll be a delay before it goes, a longer delay before it goes and tries to query that API. Okay, so this function is looking okay to me, and we can test it out. So what I'll do here is I'll say, what is your favorite color? And of course, we need to load this function in. All right, looks like I forgot to provide a required argument to rate. I will do, it says 15 requests per minute. I'll just put rate equals 15 in there. We could tweak that if this, as we fine tune the function, but I'll just leave that in there for now. And okay, it looks like our function is succeeding. What is your favorite color? And as an AI agent, I don't have personal preferences, so I don't have a favorite color. You can read just as well as I can. So it looks like we've now created a function to successfully query this API. I'll make some tweaks to this function to have a little bit more robustness in here. And I'll put this on my GitHub page. I'll share links down below so that you can see all of the code that I've provided here today. But overall, I hope you've found this content useful. Be on the lookout for the next video in this series. The next step is for us to use this function to create a Shiny app where we can create a chatbot. In that video, I plan to expand upon the different roles, so it'd be a good idea for us to have a system message for our chatbot. So come back and be on the lookout for those videos that should be coming out relatively soon. If you've made it this far into the video, I want to thank you for sticking with it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up or maybe comment down below. That interaction can help other people discover this video as well. I also want to mention that in future videos, it's likely that I'll use other packages that make everything that we did today put into a single function call. Probably the most notable one is the OpenAI package. It's very similar to the one that's the OpenAI package in Python, and it's on CRAN. So I would encourage you to check that package out if you liked what I did today, but you didn't want to have to rewrite a function for every single API call. All right, thanks for watching.